live pretty quickly. There you go. We're live. Hey everyone.
Hello.
Very happy to introduce Martin Walker. Martin, would you like to tell the group a little bit about yourself and your books?
Yes, well, I've been living in this part of France, the Périgord, for about nearly 30 years now. And I've been visiting it for many years before that. And I'm entranced by this particular corner of the earth because it's got everything. It's got a wonderful wine. It's got a terrific cuisine of its own. It's got an amazing history. And it's probably got more history than anywhere else on earth. We know that the first time that human beings buried one another with ritual and respect was 73,000 years ago, just down the road from where I live. It's a place called La Ferracie, and what we have found there are several bodies who were buried, as I say, with ritual and respect. The woman had pollen around the bones of her neck. There were children buried there with stones to protect their little skulls. This has never been seen anywhere else in the world. There's a kind of respect for people that is extraordinary. And then just up the river is the famous painted cave of Lascaux. Um, Close to where I live is Barabahau, a cave that was lived in by bears, because we've seen their paw scratches, and was then lived in by human beings. And it's amazing to think that I'm living in this area of so much history. And then there's so much of French history and Anglo-French history because the Brits were here, the English were here for 300 years in the Middle Ages, thanks to an extraordinary woman called Eleanor of Aquitaine. I love writing about this place and the food and the wine and architecture.
So, because the books are kind of contemporary, um, would you be tempted to go back and write? You're obviously very knowledgeable about history. You're not tempted to have a historical kind of novel at some point?
Well, I did. My first novel was called The Caves of Perigord, and it came out about 25 years ago or 23 years ago. And it was set here, but it was bringing together two extraordinary moments that moved me a great deal. One of them was 18,000 years ago. What kind of society could have produced the extraordinary cave of Lascaux? This is the oldest, greatest cave of art that we know. This is a cave with hundreds of wonderful drawings and paintings of cattle, of horses, of bears. When Picasso was one of the first people to see it, he was invited down by the archaeologist in 1940 when the cave was opened. Picasso said, "We have learned nothing in all of these thousands of years. These people are our masters." So I wrote this novel partly about what kind of society might have produced Lascaux, but I tied it into the same region in the summer of 1944, the liberation of France, the rise of the resistance against the Germans, against the Nazis, and their victory. And when I first came here, I'm a veteran journalist. I've been a journalist most of my life. And when I first came here, I thought, this was back in the 1980s, I thought they're all dying out, these old resistance people. So I made a point of going around to interview every single resistance fighter I could find. And I have my own little archive of all the interviews I made. And I use this a lot. And so the novel that the novel that's now being published, is one that brings in a certain amount of this history. The one I'm writing now, which is for next year, brings in a great deal more. And I, I'm fascinated by the history of this place.
Do you speak French?
Very well. Yes, I can be mistaken on a good day for a Périgourdin, not for a Frenchman, because one of the bizarre things about this part of the world is that people here didn't speak French until the 19th century, when the French government decided that they would impose compulsory French lessons for all children after the age of 5. And children would be punished if they were not speaking French, as opposed to their traditional language of Breton, Périgourdin, or Provençal, or whatever. And it was there was a famous speech by the French education minister in the 1880s, a man called Faure, and he said, "Ever since our defeat at the hands of the Germans in 1870, we realize we have to ensure that all of the children of France, whether they're Normans or Bretons or whatever, they have to speak good French so they can understand the orders of their officers." And then a deputy in the National Assembly got up, and he came from the Perigord, and he said, "That wasn't a problem for Napoleon," which is unanswerable. The people who fought Napoleon's and won Napoleon's victories, they spoke Breton, they spoke Périgourdin, Provençal, Normand, and it's only the Parisians who have always tried to impose their will upon the rest of France.
So, when you moved out to the area that you're in now, is that when you decided to start writing? Or
No,
writing the series before that?
No, I'd been writing since I was a kid. From when I left university and I joined The Guardian, I was a journalist, I was a foreign correspondent, I was in the Middle East, in Africa, in Russia in the time of Gorbachev and Perestroika, then in the USA. And I just loved moving around the world and writing about the place. And I wrote several nonfiction books. I wrote various books about the history of the extreme right, books about the history of the Cold War, books about Gorbachev, the first book ever written about Gorbachev and Perestroika, and other books. And then I arrive here in the Perigord and I become seduced by the place. And I began writing about not just the Perigord, but about a friend whom I meet, who becomes my tennis partner. And he teaches me about food and about hunting. And he was our local village policeman. He was called Pierrot. And he gave me the idea for writing a book about this guy who spent his spare time teaching the local children to play tennis or rugby, girls too. And so we actually produced one of the women who won the silver medal for France in the Olympics in 2020, playing rugby. I mean, that's a wonderful thing here. And I'm a member of that rugby club. I'm the vice president of the club. And I just adore what we do with the kids here. And I learned so much about Pierrot, his friends. And so most of the people I write about are people I knew, or I know, people about restaurants I know, winemakers that I know. I make my own wine as well. I just love being here in this magical part of France.
You've got quite a flavour of classic cars in the new book as well, haven't you? There's a lot of the action starts with them planning a classic kind of car rally, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I try to be fairly realist. So in this particular book, there's a bit about police corruption. There's a bit about there's a lot about local politics. There's a lot about the way in which my hero, Bruno, who's normally been seen as an all round decent fellow, is suddenly being criticized by a whole range of different people, starting with a campaign against him on the radio by the local Greens. Because one thing that's bizarre about France is that we have two kinds of Greens. we've got the urban Greens and the countryside Greens. And the countryside Greens like to hunt, and the countryside Greens really understand quite a lot about the way the interactions of humans and beasts. The urban Greens are idealists who don't really know all that much about the reality of life on the ground. I mean, let me explain it this way. 20 years ago, we had something like 200,000 wild boars in France. We've now got more than 2 million, and they are hugely destructive. And the reason why there are so many is that large parts of France are now, they have little labels up called chasse interdite. Hunting is forbidden. And so the hunters can't go there. And so that's where many of the deer and many of the boar will go. And so we have a huge problem. And it's one that really is a dividing line between the Greens of the countryside who know something about life and the Greens of the city who are idealists.
We didn't discuss your classic car rally there, or your love of classic cars.
I had a lovely time, thanks to my eldest daughter, in writing about car rallies. My elder daughter was for many years a well-known writer about Formula One motorsports. She used to go to all the Grand Prix. She wrote about motorsports. Her work was published in the New York Times, the Financial Times. I am terribly proud of her. She was terrific. And so it was Kate, my daughter, who tipped me off to the fact that there had been a very famous car from the 1930s, which had disappeared in the course of World War II. And one assumed that the Germans had stolen, destroyed it, or whatever. But people who had been hiding it during the resistance found that they could let people in the future know this car was still around. And to me, it was extraordinary because I began researching a lot into the history of these British and French drivers who had joined the resistance after 1940 and the way that they had tried to preserve an extraordinary heritage of France, which was a handful of these extraordinary cars that had been winning Grand Prix back in the 1930s. Without my daughter, I'd never have known about that, but it was great fun to do the research into that and also to do the research into some of these lovely old chateaux in this region who had been raided by the art police of Germany, because Hermann Goering, whom we know as the deputy Reichsführer, the deputy head of the Reich under Hitler, Goering was also a great art thief, and he set up his own separate military unit of art thieves who would go around the whole of France and steal what they could. And the places they came to in here in the Bergerac were terrible. The story that I really like, though, is that there was a well-known Frenchman, a bishop before the revolution in 1789, who then became a leading member of the post-revolutionary elite and became the chancellor of France under Napoleon. And he was called Talleyrand. He was a Prince de Talleyrand. He was a bishop, but he was also the chancellor of Napoleon's state. He was the foreign minister of Napoleon, and he was the first man to betray Napoleon. Because after the defeat of Napoleon in 1812 in the Russian campaign, Talleyrand began negotiating secretly with the King of Prussia to find a way to overthrow Napoleon. And after Napoleon's first retirement in 1814, Talleyrand was made into a lord, a count, a herzog of a small area in Prussia called Savain. And in 1940, when Goering was raiding every bloody chateau in France he could find with his larcenous art police. They come to this particular Valenciennes, the chateau of Talleyrand. And when they get there, this bunch of thieves in Luftwaffe uniform, they find a man standing on the front steps of the chateau. And he says in perfect German, "Was tun Sie hier? What are you doing here? I am the Duke of Saran. This is German territory. Get the hell out of here." And would you believe it? The Germans obeyed him. They turned around, they left. And as a result, the Louvre in Paris began sending some of its great treasures, including the Venus of Samothrace, to this particular chateau for safekeeping, many of whom survived the war, mainly because of Talleyrand, this old bishop aristocrat who had been with Napoleon, then betrayed him, and then become a German. I mean, you could not make this up. This is real history. And what I adore about writing these things, I can bring in lots and lots of history.
Do you have an end in mind for the series?
Do I have what? Excuse me?
Do you have like an end in mind for the series?
Yeah, absolutely not.
Number of books?
As long as I can carry on writing, I want to keep on going. There are people who tell me that I have to get Bruno married. I'm not sure about that. My wife tells me that the moment Bruno marries, I'll lose half my readers. I don't know, but I just want to carry on producing books about this, not just about Bruno, but about this wonderful part of the world, and about its food and its wine. And I just love writing about all of that.
So, would you ever write? I know you've written non-fiction, but would you step away from Bruno for a while and write anything else? Do you ever get any like other ideas?
Yes, I've been. When I first got here, began coming here quite often, about 30 years ago. I was so interested in the history of the resistance, against the Germans, that I went around and made a point of trying to meet and interview every resistance fighter that I could find. And so I've got a fairly unique archive of interviews with these people, and I'm tempted to try and excuse me, try and put this together into some kind of coherent form, because even to this day there's a huge controversy about the resistance, because there was so much tension between the left wing, mainly communist, and the centrist and right wing, who were mainly religious Catholics, Gaullist, and so on. And I mean, I know of places. I know the history well enough that I can take you to places where, near where I live, Caumont, there's a plateau there where there was a shootout between the communists and the Gaullists about one of the many parachute drops of arms that the British were doing. I mean, you may not know this, but the Royal Air Force, in the course of World War II, we dropped 15,000 bomb loads of arms to the French resistance. There wouldn't have been a resistance without those arms, without the RAF.
Well, you've got sort of a bit of a normal neighbour dispute as well going on in this book, haven't you? So you've got farm and the a chateau kind of falling out with each other. Do you like to build in like little bits of local drama like that in your other ones as well? This is the only one of yours I've read so far. So,
well, I mean, I don't know if you've ever known any village or small town where there aren't tensions between various people. I mean, one of the ways that we humans, we interact is some of us have close friendships, Some of us have envies or tensions between us. And what I write about in this part of France, in this village where I live, is based upon what I know of the people, is that I know that the guy who inspired me to write them, the local village copper, he had his difficulties with people. He had a lot of people who thought that he was far too influential, that he was far too often on the radio, that he was far too much seen as an expert, and he made enemies, just as he made lots of deep friends. I was a good friend, but I understand about the enemies, and you know how it is. You know what we human beings are like. In any human, in any sort of, be it a small town, be it a village, there are going to be tensions as well as affections between people. So I wanted to explore that and to see how my character would respond to that kind of difficulty.
Fair enough. It's I'm a city girl. I don't live in a small village.
You have my every sympathy.
So yeah, no, I'm quite happy about it. Do you get out and do many author events?
Yes, I do. I do. I mean, I'm about to go off and do a week-long book tour in Italy. I've just come back from a month-long book tour in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. In July, I'm off to do a book tour in the States. I'm published in 18 languages. And now that we've sold more than 7 million books, I have a lot of fans who like me to come along and do them, so visit them. So in the States, I start off in Washington, D.C., and I'm going off down to Texas, St. Louis, to Houston, in Texas to St. Louis, to North Carolina, to Phoenix, and so on and so forth. I mean, and I've been doing that for getting over 20 years. In Germany, where they have a very strong tradition of book tours, because they have a system in Germany called Preisbindung, which means fixed prices. So even Amazon or a supermarket cannot charge less than any local bookstore, which is a wonderful thing for the bookstores. It means that every small town and village in Germany has its own bookstore, and they become like a cultural center. And so over the past 19 years, since I began writing Bruno's, I have done something like 900 readings in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. And we think that next year or the year after, we'll celebrate the 1000th reading, which is going to be something quite special. And it's great because in Germany, I regularly top the bestseller list. And one reason is that because I'm regularly there doing readings and speaking German and singing in German.
Do you come over to the UK for book tours or festivals? Or
I on occasion I do, but the fact is that in Britain there are very few book tours in the traditional way of bookstores. It's mainly literary festivals, which I've done on occasion. But I mean that you'll be there at a table with 3 or 4, on a panel with various people. And frankly, I spend my time better in Germany, where I've sold so many books.
That makes sense. I mean, there are some book tours because I go to quite a few in the various bookshops locally.
Yeah, I've done book tours in the UK, and they've been great. I love it. It's true. I like being back in Britain. However, it's a question of where do you best invest your time. And whereas, I mean, in the US, where I've sold about 2 million books, I go and do a book tour every year. In Germany, of course, I'm there all the time. But I mean, you have to put your investment of time where it works best.
Do
I mean,
you?
what would you do? What would you
Well,
do?
I don't write books, so it's.
You live with books, you adore books, you read books, you talk about books, you broadcast about books.
I
I
do.
mean, you.
I run a
I mean,
book festival as well, so I'm very pro those.
what I find extraordinary is how different countries are about books. I can go to the States and I can go 300 miles between bookstores. I mean, when I do a book tour in the States, I'll be going to certain big cities, but there's this huge flyover land where the only bookstores you will see are maybe a small one in the local airport and an even smaller one in a supermarket. In Germany, in Scandinavia, there are bookstores in every small town. In France, I go to book festivals, fêtes littéraires. Uh, in Italy, it's the same. Britain has become rather like America. I mean, were it not for some of our really, really gifted book chains, we could be almost as much as the literary desert as the United States. I mean, I love being in the States. I've lived there for many years. But whereas the USA has got 330 million people, and I've sold perhaps half the number of books that I have in Germany of 80 million. What's the difference? Bookstores.
I think we've got a lot of bookstores in the UK. A lot of
You'd
the
be amazed.
a
You'd be
few
amazed.
in
You'd be
DC.
amazed to compare. You'd be amazed to look at the figures of how many books per year are bought in in the UK compared to how many are bought per head in Germany, in Sweden. And one of the key factors in Britain is that Britain and Ireland is we have a very, very strong library system, which is the backbone of sales for an awful lot of authors. It's it's a different kind of marketing system in different countries around the world. Believe me, it's something I follow.
Do you have you had any TV interest in adapting your series?
I love how I when you've written as many novels as I have, which of course there are now 18 in the Bruno series, I I have trouble keeping up. I want to sort of make sure I remember everything about the last novels. So thanks to CDs and so on, in my car I can play old novels and remind myself of what I've already written. I mean, it's I hadn't realized how complicated it would be to keep track of an author in the course of 18 different novels. And of course, I've already, number 19 is about to come out, and number 20 I've written. So it's an awful lot of stories.
Have you had TV interest in it?
Yes,
An interest in adapting it?
we have sold the rights to a Bruno series to a Hollywood operation, and we will see where that goes. I mean, I'm looking forward to seeing them, but I'm also a bit nervous about the whole TV business. I mean, I'm very aware that some of my favorite TV characters or my favorite novels have not turned into particularly convincing TV characters.
I think that depends on whether people picture things as they read or not, how they
Yeah,
feel about adaptations. Because some
I think
people
you're,
picture everything as they read, don't they? And some people don't.
I think you're right about that. I think you're absolutely right. I think that I mean I've had lots of discussions with friends in different parts of Europe about one of the great hits, which has never been a hit in Britain, but elsewhere in Europe it's huge, which is about the Donna Leon series, set in Venice, a beautiful setting and so on. And after 15 years of this series running on German television, we all pretty much everybody agrees the actor playing the role of the policeman is not quite what we want. His wife is perfect, Paola. She is the most wonderful character You can imagine she is exactly what the book says. She is redolent of Venice. I mean, she is this intelligent, smart, stylish Italian woman, a teacher. And I think that for me, I think the success of the series in Germany has been this woman, and not of the hero. And it's a bit the same in France. I mean, when I look at French TV series, it's very difficult to see why it is that people respond to a particular character. I mean, it's like Midsummer Murders in Britain. I think a lot of it depends upon the actors who are playing things.
Maybe, yeah. And I think it's also how people picture the actors themselves in their heads.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, are there any actors that you think absolutely perfectly capture the character?
I don't know, because I'm not a person who sees pictures in my head when I read. So I'm normally fairly willing to accept who people cast. Unless there's like a really clear description that doesn't match what they are.
Do you have an image of my character, Bruno, in your head at all?
I don't get any images in my head when I read.
You don't?
No,
Good for you.
no.
No sort of fantasy persons come up. Even when you read Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, never get a picture in my head when I read.
Okay. Well, you're obviously a woman of extraordinary self-control.
I don't know. It's just a thing. It's actually a named. It's a named thing. There are other people like me. There are authors who do it as well.
Well, I'm sure you're right. But are there any novels that you read where you get a real sense of a character?
Yeah, I think Anne Cleeves does it well.
Yeah,
With like her characters, I think they're very well
I
done.
agree. Yeah, but these are historic characters that she tends to bring out, about whom we know a lot in common.
Yeah, she does. I mean, she writes a good, and I think the actors who've played those characters have been very good in the TV series.
I think it's a real challenge for an actor to try and bring a literary character to life. I mean, I remember there was a period when there was film after film being made of Jane Austen and Jane Austen's characters. Do you remember this period back in the 80s and 90s? And
Mm-hmm.
it was extraordinary. I mean, some of the greatest actresses of the day were trying to bring to life these young women who'd come of age in the time of Admiral Nelson and Napoleon, and trying to make that real for 21st century women always struck me as amazing. I remember talking with my daughters and my wife about these Jane Austen series, and I loved them. My wife liked them. Our daughters were strange.
I'm a very big Jane Austen fan.
Me too. Which one is your favorite?
Either Northanger Abbey.
Oh, good for you. Do you know why I say that? It's because it's the only one that I know in the whole of the Jane Austen series that brings in something of the background of slavery and of how important that was to the prosperity of many families, gentry, sub-gentry families of that kind. Well, there was a bit about it in Mansfield Park as well, but I thought Jane was probably, until Mrs. Gaskell, really the only woman writer who was exploring some of that, as well as the comfortable life of the bourgeoisie.
True. I mean, I will also watch the BBC adaptation of Pride and Prejudice on a fairly regular basis.
How can you not?
Exactly. Um,
Have you?
kind
Are you a fan of Mrs. Gaskell as well?
no, I haven't read as much of her.
Oh, she's. I think she's great. I really do. I mean, I as a boy, I mean, I was brought up on Dickens and so on, and but later realizing, thanks to Jane Austen, that there were these extraordinary women: George Eliot, Mrs. Gaskell, in France, George Sand. There were these women who were just extraordinarily advanced for their years. I mean, they were able to dominate the literary world for decades in the early 19th century. I mean, Georges Sand was along with Alexandre Dumas, she was the best-selling writer of of France in the 1820s, 30s, and 40s, and she was a woman who was completely free in her love life. She had this great affair with Chopin, the musician. They went off and had this passionate year together in Minorca, where all the locals hated these dissolute, unmarried lovers. No, I love all this kind of stuff about all the history of the women of these days and their writings. But then I have two daughters who have brought me up to understand something about the importance of women writers.
While we're on the discussion of different writers, what have you read recently and really enjoyed?
I read a lot. I read Lee Child because I've always liked his stuff. The most recent book that I've been reading is the latest Houellebecq, who is a French author, who is very controversial because he's seen as being anti-liberal and so on. I've also been reading Banelek, who is a German author who writes mysteries set in France, and I like what he does. I've also been reading Julian Simonov. Um, I I spent years in Moscow as the correspondent for the Guardian, so I can read Russian, and I've been reading some of his old books again. So what I really enjoy doing is finding authors that I had not come across before, which is where my daughters come in because they send me books about books by women that I otherwise would not have come across. So all of those I love. And I also have a weakness for science fiction. So I'm currently reading A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, which I find a terrific piece of work.
Yeah, I'm a fan of science fiction.
Do you know it?
I haven't read that one, but I do like sci-fi.
Yeah, me too. And I think Ursula K. Le Guin is one of the great authors of our time. Do you know her work?
I do. I love her Earthsea Quartet.
Yeah, yeah, she's great.
They are very good. I quite like the sci-fi mixed with crime as well. I
Yeah,
just talked to someone called Adam Oyabanji, and his book that he's got out at the moment is sci-fi mixed with crime, and it's very good.
yeah. I mean, science fiction. I mean, I love it because you can break all the rules in science fiction. You can change the rules of gravity and everything else. And you can discover new worlds and so on. And it's a glorious escape. I also, I mean, I also like what I think of as historical science fiction, which is how I would sort of define Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings as a kind of a science fiction set back in history. Um, but I, what I like about living in rural France, I don't have a television here. And the only connection I've got with the outside world, apart from my friends and post and phones, is the internet and TV. And so I'm free to read. And that's my great pleasure in life is reading. Reading, well, and cooking.
Yeah, which you get a sense of in your books. There's a lot of discussion of cooking, isn't there? And
Well, I mean, what I've learned about the Perigord is that this really is the home of French cuisine. I mean, many people will tell you that it was Catherine de' Medici in the 16th century who brought cuisine to France when she brought it from Italy. But in fact, here in this region, we have had a distinct culinary culture for a millennium and more. And it's, I mean, this is the home of foie gras. It's the home of truffles. This is an area where there are so many rivers that this was where the ducks and the geese from Scandinavia would rest as they went down to the Mediterranean and North Africa. So many of our dishes are about ducks and geese, about things like foie gras, which is the liver of a duck, about the truffles that are grown here, about the extraordinary quality of the deer and of the wild boar that we get here. And look, we're about to start the local tennis club championship season, when I and other friends will be roasting. On one Saturday, we'll be roasting some wild boar. On another Saturday, we'll be roasting some deer, because that is what people like to eat. And it's a pretty old-fashioned way of eating, but it's a way that I adore. And at the same time, this is a place where I think you can get the best quality wines for the lowest price of anywhere in France. This is the Bergerac. The wines of Bergerac are almost a secret. I adore them. But then I would, because I'm a member of the governing body, I'm a Grand Consul. But I make my own wine, Cuvée Bruno. Wine is just such an important part of our life here, along with food. I mean, I can't think of anywhere else in the world where food is just so important every day, and wine, as here in the Perigord. And I'm so lucky to be based here.
do you ever find people coming to travel to the region because of your books?
Yes. Before I began writing these books, the Germans were either number 8 or number 9 in the nationality visiting the Perigord. They're now number 2, which is probably why I've been given a gold medal for my services to tourism by the French government. And I'm delighted that we've sold millions of books in the rest of Europe, in Spain, in Italy, in Germany, Scandinavia, all of which are bringing people here, because tourism is by far the most important single source of revenue for people around here. So I am baffled. I am really amazed that I was the first person to set novels here in the Perigord. I mean, how was it? Nobody had done this before. And so I was so lucky that because of that, more and more people are coming here. I mean, what can I say? I mean, more than of all the books I've sold worldwide, most of them are in Germany, Scandinavia, Italy, France, Czechoslovakia, Spain, Britain. It's extraordinary. I mean, just this week I had a lot of American fans who came to spend a morning with me, touring them around the area and showing them some of the historical parts of it. I have always been seduced by the extraordinary history of this part of the world. I mean, most of what we know about prehistoric peoples comes from the Perigord.
So we're coming towards the end of our time. Would you like to remind people, if they haven't already been shopping for your books, what they should be buying?
Well, the latest book, which has just come out, is called An Enemy in the Village. and it is Bruno is confronted with a number of critics, some of whom are familiar, but some of whom are not, and he's having to defend himself at the same time that he's trying to solve a particular kind of problem. And I thought I was rather worried that Bruno was beginning to look too much of a goody-goody. And so I thought it was important to have a bit of a counter view being presented, that maybe he wasn't quite as wise and smart and good as he might think he was, which is probably the case of most of us. So I wanted to bring that in. I wanted to write about some other parts of, and other reality parts, including a certain amount of police corruption that takes place that Bruno has to tackle. But there are also some very special meals that take place and some wonderful new kinds of cooking that Bruno is developing, and also some new developments in the town vineyard, which are also very promising indeed. And I have a great fun writing it, as I always do. And one of the sad things is that my dear friend and tennis partner, Pierre de Simonet, who was the village policeman here where I live, I mean, he died very suddenly a few months ago. And so I write that in many ways with him in mind, because he was the inspiration. This was a guy, he was my tennis partner, and this was a guy who was so extraordinary as a village policeman. He knew everybody. He was always there at the funerals. He danced with all of the brides at the weddings. He taught all the kids to play tennis and rugby. An extraordinary man. There was no crime here because of Pierrot. So I miss him a lot.
Yeah, you can tell. But it's nice that you're keeping his memory alive.
Yeah. It's nice to have met people like that, to have known them. It's a richness in our lives.
And then all that's left for me to say is thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you indeed. Thank you indeed. And lovely to talk to you.
You too.